June 2000. Real Madrid are 200 million euros in debt. Their business model is so unsustainable that they are just months away from bankruptcy and potentially going into administration. If this happens, it could mean the end of Real Madrid as we know it. But no one knows the trouble they're in. The club has just won their second Champions League title in 3 years and everyone is buzzing. Except one man figured out the danger the club is in. He knew the only person who could save Real Madrid was him. He came up with a plan to take them from almost bankrupt to the most valuable club in the world by taking a massive risk. One that, if didn't work, would bankrupt the club for good. With the help of his right-hand man behind the scenes, they were able to turn Real Madrid into the club we know today. This is how Florentino Pérez masterminded the success of Real Madrid. Two important things you need to know before anything. Who owns Real Madrid and who is Florentino Pérez? Real Madrid is owned by the fans and is a non-profit organization. Around 90,000 members called socios each hold voting rights for club presidency, which they must pay an annual fee of 123 euros. This isn't too common in football, and while it comes with the advantage of fans being closer to the club, it also means generating funds can only be done through revenue in broadcasting, stadium, commercial, or a bank loan, which means going into debt. They can't sell shares or have a billionaire pump money into the club. So who is Florentino Pérez? Pérez started his career as a politician in the 70s and 80s before moving into the construction business in the 90s, where he became very successful. In 1997, he became the chairman of ACS, a Spanish construction company worth billions, with Pérez himself being worth billions. More importantly, he's a lifelong Real Madrid fan, with his dad actually being a socio and taking him to matches regularly, so he had the background to be a potential president. But it wasn't until Perez noticed something terrible happening to the club when he decided he wanted to be the one to save Real Madrid. In the 90s, he reviewed the club's finances and found that Real Madrid were in terrible shape financially, with them being as much as 200 million euros in debt while constantly losing money. He knew their business model was unsustainable, and if something didn't change, Real Madrid would go bankrupt and the fan ownership would have to be given up. As a die-hard Real Madrid fan, the thought of this made him sick. He couldn't watch on as the club was dying. So he ran for president twice. The first time was in 1995, where he lost, and again in 2000. But the chances of him winning this time were slim. It would take a miracle for him to win the election. Lorenzo Sanz, then president, had just come off winning 2 Champions League titles in 3 years and was loved by the fans. The only way for Perez to win was to promise fans something so ridiculous they couldn't help but listen.
Si yo soy presidente del Real Madrid, Luis Figo será jugador del Real Madrid. Que si yo soy presidente y esto no se produjera, yo les pagaría a todos los socios las cuotas de socios de la próxima temporada.
For context, this was Figo during that time.
Yo creo que hay mucha gente que nos tiene que felicitar a todos por este triunfo. ¡Marcos, llorones, Florentino los campeones! ¡Marcos, llorones, Florentino los campeones! ¡Vista Barça!
Yet, just weeks later, this happened. How did Figo, the best player on the planet at the time, go from Barcelona faithful to the most hated man in Catalonia? How Perez did it was he approached Figo's agent, Jose Vega, and said he'd give him 2 million euros if he signed an agreement to join Real Madrid if Perez was voted in. And if he lost, they'd get the money anyway. Vega thought this was free money because no way Perez was actually going to win the election, so they wouldn't need to honor the deal. Except Perez did win. Figo tried to wiggle his way out of the deal, but a clause in that contract said otherwise. If Figo didn't join, he'd have to pay 30 million euros in compensation. That money would be used to pay for every Real Madrid's fans' ticket, which Perez had promised. That was way too much money for Figo to pay. Barca could have paid it, but that would sink them financially. There was no way out. Perez masterminded one of the craziest signings in football history. There was just one issue with this, however. Real Madrid was still in a ton of debt, and now they had to pay 60 million euros on a world record transfer. In fact, Perez ended up signing 120 million euros worth of talent in his first year. Where were they going to get this money from? Well, first they had to sell some players in order to cover costs, but this was nowhere near enough. So Perez had to take drastic measures to save the club and had to take a huge personal risk. He needed to go further into debt. In order to run for Real Madrid president, you need to be able to provide a personal pledge of 15% of the club's budget in case of financial turmoil. At the time, that was 18 million euros. He then had to take out a €60 million bank loan for the signing of Figo. The only way he got banks to agree to this was by personally guaranteeing his own money if the club couldn't reach payments, plus an extra $56 million for the other signings he made, and an extra $12 million to cover the club's spending costs for the year, all of which Perez was personally guaranteeing. If Perez didn't have a plan to start making the club money fast, he'd have a serious financial problem on his hands. But this risk was necessary to kickstart his first era as president. Step 1 in making more money was hiring the right people. He hired a director for 4 main units: sporting, marketing, stadium, and corporate. Carlos was responsible for the corporate side of things and was tasked with bringing in some much needed short-term financial stability. He did this by selling Madrid's future. An expert businessman in his own right, he and Perez were able to use their success and credibility in the construction industry to convince businesses to pay them now for a percentage of future marketing and sponsorship revenues of the club. They were able to sell 30% of their sponsorship rights for €117.2 million. This gave the club some liquid cash for operations. You may know this as a financial lever. This only solved part of the problem. They still needed more money. There was only one thing left they could sell that could fully save them. The Santiago Bernabeu is at the heart of Madrid. Not too far from it was their training ground, also right in the expanding city. The ground wasn't all that big, and being in the city, it was prime real estate that Real didn't really need to hold on to. Florentino knew this was his best chance at making a huge lump sum of cash, and so using his business skills, he was able to negotiate a deal selling the plot of land to 4 corporations who built 4 skyscrapers which became their headquarters. He sold it for a massive €474 million, enough money to wipe clear their previous debt with money left over. Money that went into building a bigger and better state-of-the-art training complex on the outskirts of the city for just a fraction of what they sold the old training ground for, as well as upgrading the stadium with that money too, making it more hospitable to attract more fans. In less than 2 years as president, he completely turned the club's financial situation around, and they were now a thriving business. But there was still one more thing Perez needed to do to ensure the club would make money for many years to come. They were already the most successful club in history, but when it came to revenue, they were nowhere near the competition. In comes the Galácticos policy, the policy of signing one superstar each year. Figo, Zidane, Ronaldo. All Ballon d'Or winners and all extremely marketable. Both Valdano and Sanchez were able to bring in these record signings and subsequently market them like superstars, selling tons of jerseys, putting them in a bunch of commercials, and now the stands of the Bernabeu were selling out every week, bringing in even more revenue. The players were by no means cheap, but they made up for their transfer fee through commercial and marketing. Plus, Perez was able to generate even more money by making it a standard that every player gives 50% of their image rights to the club. They did this because they believed players were benefiting from playing for the greatest club, and so Real Madrid took a cut of sponsorships from all of their players. Thanks to them signing the biggest names in football, plus an elite marketing department, the Real Madrid brand started to grow more and more, with the club even winning the Champions League title in 2002, further boosting their branding and revenue. Yet, none of that compared to one signing that made Real Madrid the biggest brand in football. David Beckham in 2003 was easily the most famous footballer on the planet. Thanks to big brand partnerships, his relationship with the Spice Girl, he would be just the celebrity name Perez wanted to sign. But it was his appeal in Asia that really stood out, and with this signing, they could have a much bigger global outreach. At the time, Beckham was having a very public falling out with Sir Alex Ferguson, and United were willing to get rid of him. So when Perez found out they only wanted €35 million, he didn't blink twice. He pulled the trigger, and just like that, he was the newest Galactico. And so the frenzy began.
He was mobbed by fans. Anywhere he went, they went. Thousands swarming just to catch a glimpse of him. He was a mega celebrity who had the whole world watching.
The appeal Beckham brought to the club was insane, and the club were making tons of money. Jose Sanchez was able to form partnerships and sponsors, as well as a pre-season tour in Asia that netted them €10 million profit. Just like that, their commercial revenue skyrocketed. Financially, this signing was more than worth it. But football-wise, this signing actually made 0 sense. Where the hell was Beckham gonna play? He's one of the best right midfielders on the planet, but they had the best right midfielder in Figo. He couldn't play on the left, that was Zidane's role, and the strike partnership was set, so they stuck him in midfield in a much more defensive role, where his attacking qualities were nullified and his defensive inefficiencies amplified. To make it even worse, the club sold defensive mid Makelele after not offering him enough money, with Perez saying, "He rarely passed the ball more than 3 meters. Younger players will arrive who will cause Makelele to be forgotten." He said this about someone who Zidane called the most important player on the team. In his words, why put another layer of gold paint on the Bentley when you are losing the entire engine? It wasn't just Makelele they lost. They lost their captain in Hierro that 2003 summer too, and manager Vicente Del Bosque. 2 important leaders were gone and the team started falling apart. They started losing key squad players too, the middle class, and decided to try and replace them with academy prospects. That didn't work. The youth weren't ready for first team football and they got exposed fast. The team still had a great crop of superstars and had their moments of footballing brilliance, but when you're solely reliant on like 8 players, you start to stretch them a little thin. They just didn't have much squad depth to compete over a full season, so they kept missing out on trophies. And over the next couple of years, instead of addressing that problem, the transfer strategy was still to sign players based on their name rather than talent, opting to buy Ballon d'Or winner Michael Owen rather than the defensive mid like Vieira or Xabi Alonso. This imbalance in the team kept leading to worse and worse performances. They failed to replace Del Bosque, going through loads of managers, none of whom lasted more than a year or won a single trophy. And by the 05-06 season, it had become unsalvageable. Figo was gone, Zidane announced his retirement, Ronaldo was constantly injured, and Madrid had to watch on as their bitter rivals lifted the Champions League while they went trophyless for the 3rd straight year. In 2006, Perez ended up resigning from his post as president, claiming maybe he had spoiled the team, that him leaving will bring the change in direction Real Madrid needs. Figo chalked it up to one thing: it all went wrong when marketing took preference over football. Maybe he was right. The club was more focused on becoming movie stars, filming adverts before training, and being a brand more than a football club. But the strategy of their marketing and Galacticos policy was actually a massive success. When Perez joined in 2000, Real were 5th in revenue, with most of their revenue coming from broadcasting. By 2006, they were number 1, with their revenue now more than double, with most of it commercial. They also saw a big spike in matchday revenue as well. VIP box seats were always sold out to watch the Galácticos. Perez left the club in a better financial situation than he found it, and the next president, Calderon, was tasked with getting Real Madrid back to winning ways. He did exactly that. In the 3 years that he was at the club, they won back-to-back league titles, although the team did fail to make it past the round of 16 in the Champions League during his tenure. So if he managed to win trophies, something Perez failed to do in his final 3 years, why did Calderon resign in disgrace in 2009? Well, there were many reasons. For one, he didn't have the same pulling power as Perez. He failed to sign Ronaldo, Kaká, Fabregas, Villa, after promising fans he would. But the main reason that saw his demise was a scandal that broke, where it was alleged that Calderon forged votes in a members' meeting regarding the approval of his administration. He denied this, of course, but still resigned in embarrassing fashion, much to the joy of Real Madrid fans. There was one key thing that happened during his presidency, however, that completely changed the club's finances. Of Perez's original team, only Jose Sanchez stayed on board. Reason being, he was the most valuable member. After showcasing his commercial expertise, helping the club gain a load of marketing money, he kept negotiating lucrative sponsorships for Real. He was integral to the rise of digital marketing and revenue at Real Madrid, and most importantly, helped negotiate a mega TV deal for the club. Back in 2006, Spanish teams negotiated their own TV deals. It wasn't like in England where the TV deals are shared collectively. This meant Real Madrid could strike up a massive TV deal, which they did with a media pro worth 1.1 billion euros over 7 years. Other Spanish clubs were making a fraction of this. This completely transformed their revenue, spiking it up like never before. Their financial position was the strongest it had ever been. With Perez now returning in 2009, it meant the club could now move forward into starting a new campaign, the quest for La Decima. Perez's first order of business was to bring back his old crew with one change. Jose Angel Sanchez was made CEO of Real Madrid. He was now the most powerful man at the club, just below Perez. This promotion would end up being one of the best decisions Perez has made as president. The new strategy for signing players and making money was simple. Do the Galacticos again, but do it right this time. invest in superstar signings based on how they will fit into the team and give Real the best chance of winning the Champions League. The two names that were a priority were Kaká and Cristiano Ronaldo. Both had massive commercial appeal to them with big fan bases, both were Ballon d'Or winners, and both would perform well and bring joy to Real Madrid fans again. He signed Kaká for 67 million euros and Ronaldo for 94 million, a world record fee. These were steep prices for two players. Factoring in the salaries of a combined 30 million a year, these two alone would have cost the club hundreds of millions. Plus, they weren't done there. They signed Benzema, Xabi Alonso, Raul Albiol and more. All together, with salaries included, this was close to a €500 million investment. So how the hell could they afford it? They sold a few players in the process, albeit for cheaper than they wanted, but that raised some money and cleared salaries. They were predicting that making these big signings would increase their shirt sales and commercial revenue. It was also seen as a long-term investment. The way Valdano put it is that if you spend $100 million making a film, you know it will grow small if you get Sylvester Stallone, because whether he can act or not, he puts bums in seats. That was the thinking behind Perez's crazy signings. Whether it would actually work was a different story, but the reality of how they could actually afford to spend nearly €300 million on Perez's return was actually a simple answer. They couldn't. Real didn't have the money to spend on these crazy price tags. Instead, Perez used his power and influence to get his money elsewhere by securing two massive loans from Spanish banks worth $200 million with very low interest on them. Banks didn't want to deny such an influential figure and club this line of credit. It was still a massive risk to take. This meant putting the club in big debt, and without a training ground to sell, this time they had to rely on revenue to get themselves out of this hole. A massive gamble, one that at first did not pay off. That first season, they lost in their three major competitions. It was the same issue Perez had the first time around, star signings that couldn't produce on the field. His losing record as president was severely hurting his reputation. He knew he couldn't afford this trophyless streak, and so he had to make a major change to stop that. Pellegrini was sacked after one season, and Jose Sanchez was tasked with bringing a new man in. Thanks to his close relationship with agent Jorge Mendes, Sanchez was able to secure the signature of Jose Mourinho, a two-time Champions League winner and the most sought-after coach in football. The Mourinho era at Madrid lasted 3 seasons and had plenty of ups and downs. The transfer strategy over this time period changed. Real was still paying off bank loans and so couldn't really make any Galactico signings. Instead, they settled on signing players on the cheap and ultimately saving as much money as possible. But maybe this was a blessing in disguise, as they managed to pick up some great signings for very cheap prices. Players that either went on to become legends at the club or were sold later down the line for profit. Mourinho also ended Perez's 4-year trophy drought, winning the Copa del Rey in his first season and league title in his second. But despite the trophies, the one thing Perez wanted more than anything, Jose couldn't get. He was knocked out of the Champions League semi-final 3 years in a row, having to watch their fierce rivals Barcelona win it again. Perez just had to switch things up again if he wanted to win another UCL for Los Blancos. There was a huge problem that Real Madrid had, however. For years now, Real had been the market superpower, having first pick of the best players in the world due to their incredible finances, pulling power and reputation. But their monopoly over the transfer market was ending. Man City and PSG had been taken over by Gulf states and now had billions to spend and compete with Real in the transfer market. Real didn't have the same financial power that they had. Plus, with the Premier League growing in revenue and English clubs being able to spend more, the market became much more competitive for Real Madrid. They had to re-evaluate. Perez had to put his pride aside and sign players solely based on their ability to help the team win. For the 13-14 season, Real Madrid had cleared a lot of their debt from the 2009 signings, plus they sold some squad players at a good profit to raise some more funds, and now they had some money to spend in the market. With a new approach, they wanted to sign a young attacker who could help them win now. After missing out on Neymar, Bale was the next best option, a world-class winger who proved himself in England. Perez knew a signing like this could take them over the edge. €100 million, a new transfer record for the Welshman. They also invested in some potential hidden gems, getting Casemiro and Dani Carvajal on the cheap. The cherry on top was they managed to bring in two-time Champions League winning coach Carlo Ancelotti on board. It seemed like everything was in place for Real to finally get their 10th Champions League. Immediately, the signing of Bale paid off after his incredible solo effort helped them win the Copa del Rey against Barcelona, and in the Champions League they managed to reach the final, where they came up against Atletico Madrid.
Despite Atleti scoring first, Real did what they do best. They finally achieved La Decima. Perez got to realize his dream as president and had his biggest accomplishment yet. Along with the financial expertise of Jose Sanchez, they were able to build a team after all those years that not only made a bunch of money, but were able to win. This win boosted their finances as well. They grew in popularity, won more prize money and more broadcasting revenue, becoming the first team ever to earn over 200 million euros from broadcasting alone. Perez finally delivered, but it didn't take him too long to become a hated man again. After La Decima, Perez let two massive players go, Di Maria and Xabi Alonso. Both were key pieces in the team, and neither departure sat right with Real Madrid fans, players or coaches. Alonso was ready to leave, but Di Maria asked for more money than Perez was willing to pay. Other clubs in that situation would have caved and might have ruined their wage structure, but Perez let him go to United. An unpopular decision at the time, but arguably the correct call. As replacements, Perez signed James Rodriguez and Toni Kroos. James was the signing that gained more media coverage, but Kroos for 25 million euros was the bargain of the century. Bayern CEO said he was not a world-class player and let him go for pennies on the dollar. For the 15-16 season, Rafa Benitez was brought in after Ancelotti failed to repeat his Champions League success. But Rafa lasted just 6 months and seriously underperformed as coach. Perez always struggled with picking good coaches, but he decided to take a massive risk in his next manager choice. He brought in Zinedine Zidane, someone who has never managed a first team ever, but someone who was Real through and through. He knew the club culture, the values and expectations. He had the respect of the players too. Above all, he was a winner. This hiring had to go right for Perez. His stock amongst fans was dropping as the constant manager carousel was frustrating, and everyone knew this team was more than capable of winning. But when Zidane came in, this was like Thanos getting that final Infinity Stone. It was the last piece of a complex puzzle. It was the last thing they needed to see on-field success. After this, Real Madrid became the kings of Europe.
It's Ronaldo. It is Real Madrid. Has handed it over, and it's raised by Sergio Ramos.
He's smiling down. They're smiling here. Ronaldo, a pair of goals. Real Madrid, back-to-back titles. A romp in Cardiff.
مارسيلو وقفها يمشي مارسيلو يوزع كورة عودة له جول يا جارث يا بيل التشبيه حد الثاني هيستوريكو فينومينال جولاتو
During Zidane's first 3 years, Real Madrid won 3 Champions League titles in a row, plus 2 Club World Cups and a league title. Everything had finally gone to plan. They figured it out and did so while barely spending any money in the transfer market during their three-peat. In fact, the team all 3 years stayed relatively the same, and when you look at the transfer fee spent on these players, you realize this was a masterclass in recruiting. They dropped the Galacticos policy and it focused instead on signing talent that could help them win over the long term, and it ended up being that middle class that won them 4 in 5 years. Perez had evolved greatly as a president, no longer forcing Galactico signings, but instead relying on signing actual talent. He learned from his mistakes and dominated Europe in the process. For Perez's time at Real, it could very much be described as off-field financial success with a limited on-field success. But now that they were finding on-field success, they were having limited financial success. For the first time since Perez took over, Real were knocked off the top spot for the highest earning club in 2016 and 2017. One change to Spanish law is what caused this massive problem with their revenue. We know about the TV deal Real Madrid had worth billions, the same deal that had them earning so much more than any other Spanish club. Well, in 2016, the Spanish government took action and passed a law that required TV distribution to be split up more fairly. There was now more money to split between clubs and a much more even share of money. Except for Real, their revenue from broadcasting now took a massive hit.
With stagnant broadcasting revenue, it meant less money to spend in the transfer market. They couldn't afford the premium prices of superstars anymore, and with clubs like United, PSG, City and Barcelona all forking out hundreds of millions to spend on transfers, Real had to just watch as the price tags became too expensive. It's how they missed out on superstars like Pogba, who United were willing to pay a record fee for, and even Mbappe before he joined PSG, who didn't bat an eyelid at the €180 million price. Rather than putting the club into massive debt that they couldn't get out of, he had to change strategy. And taking out bank loans wasn't an option either. They couldn't afford it, and Perez needed big loans for a different project, one that he knew would revolutionize the club. However, in 2018, the club was shaken up. Both Ronaldo and Zidane left the club to the shock of many. Ronaldo and Perez couldn't come to an agreement on a new contract, and when Ronaldo threatened to leave, Perez did nothing to stop him, because Perez is not in the business of begging. As for Zidane, well, he just felt like he peaked and didn't see a way to keep up his insane winning, and so left. The two most important pieces to the puzzle were gone, and so the rebuild had to commence. The team didn't have crazy budgets and the squad was aging, so Madrid decided to focus their efforts on a new strategy. Jose Sanchez once again spearheaded this pivotal chapter for Real Madrid. He hired Juni Calafat, a Brazilian scout, in 2013. Perez gave him one objective: do not let another Neymar slip through the net. They weren't focused anymore on buying superstars, but instead creating them. Turns out he's pretty good at his job. He was the brains behind the signing of Casemiro and Fede Valverde for extremely cheap. With his insane talent ID, he was also the front man in the signings of Vinicius Jr. and Rodrigo. 4 certified Real legends were signed because of Calafat. This obviously wasn't always the case. Sometimes they signed young talent who didn't break into the first team but made them a profit, and sometimes the wonder kid signing outright flops. But this was a risk the club were willing to take, because they didn't have to spend 100 million and 300,000 a week in wages for each signing. More often than not, the young players they invested in became first team regulars, some even reaching world-class status. The only thing they had to have was patience. In the meantime, Madrid kinda had to accept sucking for a while. That 18-19 season, they had 3 different managers and had some terrible performances. That was enough for Perez and co to try and make some groundbreaking changes in the 1920 transfer window by spending nearly 200 million on Hazard and Luka Jovic, 2 signings who were terrible during their time at the club. This brief switch of strategy not working out made Perez committed to more young signings that have made significant contributions to the team. That same season, COVID hit and football took a massive hit financially, with games stopping and no fans in attendance. Real lost a lot in revenue over those 2 COVID years. Those years damaged a lot of clubs financially, and to this day still haven't recovered. But Perez and his team managed to limit the damage. They spent nothing on transfers, meaning yes, their performance took a hit, but that was a necessity. They also sold quite a few players and at a good profit too, as well as players taking a pay cut to ease the club's financial situation, ensuring Real's financial stability through the tough period. By the 21-22 season, they were extremely cautious with the money they were spending, keeping up signing youth and opting to start signing players who ran down their contracts on a free. The main thing they made sure they did, however, was cashing in on aging stars and getting their wages off the book. They let some of the high earners go on a free and sold Varane and Casemiro for great prices, meaning that they had a positive net spend from 2020 to 2023. They also brought in Don Carlo Ancelotti in 2021 to try and bring some of that UCL magic back to the squad. And well, in his first season back as Madrid coach, they pulled off the unthinkable.
Carvajal. Scores! Samira at Carvajal at his shoulder. Hit into Perez, yes! Real Madrid take the lead! Simply unique.
Their 14th UCL title. Florentino Pérez's 6th. Thanks to Benzema becoming literally the best striker on the planet and the young talent they invested in, they were able to pull off a world-class Champions League run and win it again. It was clear, however, that Real didn't have the same power in the transfer market. They desperately needed a striker, and at the time, both Mbappe and Haaland supposedly had Real as their first choice, except neither of them joined and they missed out on a world-class talent. Instead, they had to snap up Arda Güler and spent big on a 19-year-old who was already playing at top level, Jude Bellingham. They weren't able to sign a striker. Turns out they didn't need one. Jude was enough. He hit the ground running and scored 19 league goals. And as for the Champions League, Real asserted their dominance over Europe yet again.
Black gold. It was the match winner 2 years ago in Paris. Finals. They've won 6.
This team really had no business winning the Champions League, yet they did. And when you look at the team they did it with, no matter how many times they rebuild this squad, they always find a way to win. This isn't a team full of superstars Real Madrid bought. It was a team that Real Madrid turned into superstars through coaching, branding, leadership, and culture. Plus, the core of this team is young enough to play together for the next decade. On the pitch, Real have played this rebuild to perfection. But off the pitch, their finances had a massive overhaul, and Perez masterminded one of the greatest projects in modern football history. Real were no longer the top earners in football after their broadcasting revenue took a massive hit. They were also already optimized for commercial income thanks to Jose Sanchez, with their young signings turning into superstars and still retaining 50% of image rights. But the one revenue stream they still needed to fully maximize was stadium revenue. So in 2019, Real announced the plans for a new Bernabeu stadium. In order to rebuild it completely, the club took out 1.1 billion euros in loans at an extremely favorable interest rate of just 1.53% that is going to be paid off over the next 30 years, or equivalent to around 60 million euros per year. Taking out a massive loan seems risky on paper, until you realize this loan was used to build a stadium with a retractable pitch and roof, a 360 scoreboard, and state-of-the-art facilities. The reason this is important is because they weren't building a stadium just for football. They were building a multi-purpose arena that could generate revenue in a million different ways. Whether business or tech conferences, concerts, other sports, they've turned this into a hub for Madrid. They have loads of luxury restaurants all over the stadium that will open all week long that double up as a VIP area on game days too. The stadium has a store, museum, and its own Bernabeu market with a bunch of sponsors. But the thing that changed the stadium revenue the most was personal seat licenses. A paid license that gives the holder the right to buy season tickets for a specific VIP seat in the stadium. One seat is worth 250,000 euros, and there's 300 of them, meaning Real Madrid bought in 75 million from PSLs alone. It is a one-off purchase, but the holder still needs to buy seats for each game. Plus, Real are looking into building more of these PSL seats to increase revenue even further. All of these stadium features combined is the reason Real Madrid made a whopping 1 billion euros in revenue in the 23-24 season, with their matchday revenue more than doubling from the year before. They surpassed everyone in revenue and officially became the most valuable football club on the planet. Florentino did exactly what he set out to do. Real Madrid in the 24-25 season returned to their early Galactico ways. They lost a key piece in Cruz to retirement, yet they signed an 18-year-old Endrick, and after years of pursuit they finally signed Mbappe. They paid PSG nothing for him. He ran down his contract and he was theirs, arguably the best player in the world. Another Galactico signing, and they got him for free. Perez had to be patient, but thanks to creating such an attractive sporting project, he joined. However, just like the early Galactico days, signing a bunch of attackers and ignoring midfielders and defenders doesn't exactly equate to the best on-field performances. In order to balance the squad, Real will need to sign some defenders fast. However, Real Madrid are still in a great position for the future of their club. Perez has cemented himself as one of the greatest presidents in football history. But he hasn't done it without some major controversies. He's been trying to form a breakaway European Super League for the last couple of years now. He also has a great deal of power over the Spanish media, controlling what a lot of journalists say. There's also the allegations of him using his stature at Real Madrid to gain lucrative construction contracts for his company. In a lot of people's eyes, Perez is Mr. Do-No-Wrong, when that is obviously not the case. However, all of these things are allegations and don't take away from the fact when it comes to running Real Madrid, he's the man for the job. Perez has always looked for ways to expand the club's revenue from just football too. In 2012, he had a legitimate plan to build an entire Real Madrid-themed island in the UAE worth 1 billion euros, with a 5-star hotel, marina, amusement park, and more. However, that plan never materialized, and instead, they had to settle for Real Madrid World in Dubai, which is a much smaller scale version of his original project. They have another non-football project as well, opening their own burger chain called Uno, which opened in Mexico, and they aim to have 250 stores by 2029, with forecast of 762 million in revenue in 7 years.
if they pull that off, it could generate a new level of revenue for them. Perez is doing all of this to ensure the future of Real financially is thriving, that a team that doesn't have billionaire owners can still generate revenue to sustain the club for a long time. Over the last 25 years, he's managed to get the club out of serious debt, build up their branding and business, assemble a winning team and culture, and become the most valuable football club in the world. The only question left is what happens when he leaves. He's amassed a level of power no one else can match. Who can replace that? The most obvious answer right now is Jose Angel Sanchez, Perez's right-hand man, who is arguably equally responsible for the success of the club as Perez, but who knows if he can live up to the same expectations. Regardless, Real have been the #1 team for over a decade now, managing to rebuild, winning with different teams, different coaches, and not declining like teams like Barcelona and Man United. Instead, through smart decisions and expert leadership, they have extended their lead as the most successful football club in history, and have demonstrated a masterclass in how to effectively run a football club.